If what I think is happening, it better not be. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 48 of Movies Are Awesome, the show all about eating vegans. My name is Nathan Pottle, and thank you so much for joining me today. Episode number 48, we're only 2 away from number 50. That is just crazy. And today, I am wanting to talk about the movie 1917. I finally had a chance to see it. I've actually seen it twice, and oh boy, did I ever enjoy this movie. I'm so excited to talk about it here today. As per usual, when it comes to my movie reviews, I'm going to start with non-spoilers first, and then I will give you a warning, and we'll move into the spoiler section. And oh my goodness, this movie was fantastic. So it was nominated for a bunch of Academy Awards, even though, like I mentioned, I don't care for those, but there's a lot of recognition towards this movie. A lot of people were getting behind it and saying, like, hey, this movie is really something special, you should go check it out. And I was very excited once we were getting a lot of buzz. It's very well reviewed. Why don't I give you a brief overview on what the story is before we jump into it here. So this is the story of corporal or lieutenant or some kind of ranking officer. His name is Blake. And him and his friend are tasked with sending a message to another group of soldiers who are going to mount an attack the following morning. And their orders are to stop the attack because they're walking into a trap, and if they do the attack, they're all going to die. And so our main character of Blake, his brother is in that band of soldiers who are in the next morning's attack, and so they go off on this journey to stop the attack. And so it's him and his friend, and it's basically a road trip movie, I guess, but it's also a war film. This movie is directed by Sam Mendes, who is probably most well known for directing Skyfall, the James Bond movie, which is very, very good. I like that movie a lot, and I think this movie is even better. This movie is absolutely phenomenal. Now, if you are not familiar, this movie is filmed to look like it's all one continuous camera shot. And I have to say that it is absolutely seamless. There are a few points where you can tell where one shot ends and another begins, but that's not what I mean by seamless. I mean by seamless in the sense that the story continues at a breakneck pace and you're following these characters along throughout the story and there's no time to stop. And so choosing to film the movie in this way, in a continuous fashion where you're just following them the entire time, you are on the journey with them. It feels like you're walking along with them through the trenches and then across the fields and stuff. It's really, really good in that sense. And actually, I can't think of any other way to do this movie other than the way that it is presented to me here, because it's done so well. Roger Deakins is the cinematographer for this film. He is excellent. He's been nominated for so many awards, countless awards. He did the cinematography for Blade Runner 2049, which is a movie I always talk about here on the show because I just think it's absolutely brilliant. It's also absolutely beautiful. And he just has such a wide range of what he can do. And this is just a showcasing of all of his abilities as a cinematographer. Being able to go from one frame shot to another to another to another with just continuous camera movement is absolutely brilliant. I think it flows in a way that a lot of other movies that are made in this style do not. Now, this is not the only movie to be made as one camera shot. Back in 2014, Birdman, which won Best Picture, is made to look like one camera shot, and an Alfred Hitchcock movie called Rope is also another one. Now, each of these movies does it for a different reason. Rope is a movie about two gentlemen who kill someone and try to get away with it over the course of a dinner party. And so, because it's over the course of just one event, we're seeing it just through one camera shot. Now, there are breaks, and because that movie was made such a long time ago, it's a lot more obvious where the breaks are in the camera. But Birdman is made all as one camera shot because it's in the vein of a stage play, and it's all about a character making a stage play. And so, in order to reflect that, we get it all as one camera shot so that it's presented to us in the manner of how you would watch a live performance. And then this movie here, you're with the characters the entire time and you're traveling with them. And so there's no breaks because you have to get somewhere and you have no time to stop. And I think that's something that this movie really nails, is the feeling of stakes. You know exactly what they need to do and what's going to happen if they don't make it in time. There's 1,600 people, 1,600 lives on the line that they need to go and save and rescue, including our main character's brother, Blake. And so with that feeling of stakes, you also have that extra added level of tension. And I think that really comes from once again, going back to the style and how the movie is shot. Because the camera is always with the characters the entire time, we don't get to see anything beyond them. Sometimes we do, but very, very rarely within the film. So when you're watching and things happen from outside coming in, you don't see them coming. And so because things kind of like happen out of nowhere, or you're just like caught up in something immediately, you don't have time to react. You're reacting with the characters as it's happening to them. And so there's that tension of like, what's going to happen next? You have no idea, just because it's presented to you so well. I think I want to talk about just overall, this movie is a technical achievement. Sure, the cinematography, absolutely, but the score is also fantastic. The performances are all really good. We have some really good appearances from some famous British actors throughout the film that come in, have their one little piece in the story, and then they leave. And I really like that, because every now and then you'll notice someone that you recognize, and that's really nice and really great. The visual effects for this movie also are spectacular, and the set design also just completely above and beyond other movies. And I wish that I would have seen this movie in 2019 when it first came out, because if I had, it would have for sure made my top 10 favorite movies of the year. Like, I absolutely loved this movie. It is so excellent. The set design, just one thing in particular that I wanted to mention is there's a scene where the two characters are walking through kind of like a field type area where the Germans have set up a bunch of guns, and they're these huge cannon guns, and the massive shells of the guns are just scattered everywhere. And I think that scene is just so stunning. It's perfect. It looks so dynamic, and it really gives you the feeling of the destructive power of war. And I really, like, coming out of the movie, like, that image is really ingrained in my mind. Like, I like that a lot. I don't want to say too much else without getting into spoilery stuff, so I think that I'm going to move into spoilers now at this point. So if you have not seen the movie, I highly recommend it. Go check out 1917. See it a couple times if you have to. I really enjoyed it the second time around, like already knowing what's going to happen, but then I can see like deeper into the filmmaking and kind of the foreshadowing that happens and some other stuff that's going on in the background. So check it out, then come back to the podcast and we can talk about the spoilers. Let's have a discussion about this movie, because there's so much to talk about here. And I wrote down in my notes just some like scene by scene, some of the stuff that happens that I want to talk about. So they get their mission and then they go off, and crossing no man's land is really an excellent kind of start to the whole thing. Like, we get a little bit of tension, we get a little bit of the horrors of war, we get a little bit of insight into who these characters are, and then we go on to the once they get to the German line and then down into the barracks. But the crossing of no man's land, I feel, is very important. It really establishes who these characters are, how they interact with each other, and their friendship, because they are friends. The first shot of the movie is them sitting next to each other, and they're both kind of taking a nap, and then off we go. Going from no man's land and then into the barracks, when we go underground and the two characters have their flashlights and they see the rats, you really get a feeling of claustrophobia, and it like makes you nervous and you feel like something's gonna happen down there. And then like the rats are going about, but then they find the tripwire, and when the rat triggers the tripwire, I was just I felt so I was so fearful for the characters, is probably the best way to describe it, because like an explosion just went off and they're underground and everything's collapsing, and the what is that guy's name? Will, I think. I think his name is Will. Why don't I look it up? Another classic Nathan looking up things while he's recording. Sheffield, that's his name. Lance Corporal Sheffield. Like, he's like completely buried and he's got like dust in his eyes and he can't see and he can hardly breathe, and like you can just feel it because you're in there with them. It makes you squirm in your seat, you know, just because of how the movie is presented to you. And so I really like that scene and what it does for the story, and it goes on to further develop their friendship. And then when they get out of the barracks and Sheffield is complaining about Blake and saying like, oh, you don't really think before you act and all of these different things, like, why did you choose me to go on this mission? It gives you a really like different look, and gives it like not a different look but a wider view. And like I like it that as we get to know the characters more and more, we get to like really understand them more. And then we go on to the farmhouse scene. Now, before we get to the farmhouse, Blake and Sheffield are talking about the medals. Now, Sheffield had won a medal for bravery in the army or whatever. I'm not 100% sure what he won it for, but he gave it away. And it's a very interesting viewpoint that he has on this, that like he doesn't care about being recognized for his actions or getting some kind of award. He just wants to like fight his war and go home. And he says that he got to go home on a leave and then had to come back, and he absolutely hated going home because he knew he was going to have to come back and he was scared about dying. And because we're in the spoiler section, we can talk about it right now. So like he was worried about dying, and then like his wife and daughter, which we learn that he has at the end, he's worried that they'll lose him, that he'll be dead. And so like going back home, knowing he has to go back, knowing that it might be the last time he ever sees them, he absolutely hated it. And does he think that a medal and a ribbon is going to make them feel better? No. And so that's why he gave it away for a bottle of wine, because he was thirsty. And like that exact point is brought up by one of the other characters. Can't remember the actor's name, but he plays Moriarty in Sherlock. He says something about a ribbon, and how it like it's not going to comfort widows, basically. So these guys, they just don't care about being awarded anything. They just want to fight their fight, survive it, and go home. And that's a really good way to think about it. Like, I think if I were in the army, I would want to come back home. Unfortunately, though, one of the characters doesn't get to go home, and about halfway through the movie is when Blake dies. And like I kind of figured that someone was going to die, but I thought it would be closer to the end of the film. It's not often that like the person you thought was the main character of the movie is just dead. The only other movie that does that I can think of in my mind is Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho back in 1960, when Marion Crane's character is murdered, but you have been following her the whole movie, so you thought she was the main character, but then the story shifts. And that's exactly what happens here. When Blake is murdered by the German pilot, the movie shifts focus, and it's no longer a story about a man trying to save his brother. It's now a friend trying to save a battalion. Like, and he now is the sole person who can do this job. It's only him. He has the orders and he has to get there. And I think that that shift in the story is really, really important. And then it's kind of revealed to you that Sheffield has kind of been the main character the entire time, as opposed to Blake being the main character. And looking back, that makes a lot of sense because the very first shot of the movie, when you're overlooking the field and the camera pulls back and you see both characters, it's Sheffield that is in the foreground and you see his face, and Blake is lying down horizontally and his helmet is covering his face. You don't even see his face and his character is not in focus. So even from that first shot, you can see that Sheffield is the main character here, just based off of that shot. But based off of how the story kind of leads you in the beginning, you begin to think like, okay, Blake is our main character. But then once he dies, then everything becomes clear. Sheffield is our main character. He wants to go home to his family. He doesn't care about awards or whatever. He just wants to do his job and go home. And while I'm talking about that first shot of the movie, I love how the movie begins and ends with Sheffield leaning up against that tree. Now, it's just after everything that has happened to him, and this movie takes place over about the course of 24 hours. The movie starts with him leaning up against a tree with his friend. By the end of the movie, his friend is dead, and he's gone through all of these harrowing things. He went to war with a sniper. He met the woman and the child, and I'll go back to that scene and talk about it in a second. But all of the things that he went through, and he talks to Blake's brother about his death and delivers his rings to him. And after all of those things, he just wants the normalcy of what he had before. And so what does he do? He goes and he leans up against the tree. And so the movie begins and ends with him in the very same position that he was in, just relaxing by a tree, because he doesn't want to be part of a war. He just wants to have that feeling of normalcy. He wants to go home. And so then going back to there's the sniper scene, and he shoots the sniper and kills it. But then when he's in the town and he meets the woman and the child, it reminds him of what he's fighting for, because he has a wife and child back at home, and it's just, and I don't think he tells anybody. I don't think anyone knows about his life at home, and even us as the audience doesn't know about it until the very end of the film. So that interaction with the child, and he's immediately taking off his bag, he's giving them all of the food, he gives them the milk that he found, because he knows what he's fighting for. He knows what his priorities are. Doesn't care about medals, doesn't care about awards. He cares about protecting people and giving them what they need to survive. And even though I feel this scene maybe slows the movie down a little bit too much, and we're getting close to the end of the movie at this point, and I really feel like Sheffield is wasting a lot of time here, and he knows that he has this urgency to go deliver this letter, but also at the same time, he has a duty and an obligation to protect this woman and child in any way that he can, and he can't stay with them, and he knows that, but he's able to help them out in this way by giving them all of this food. And I think that this scene is absolutely beautiful, and he says the little rhyme, the poem to the little French baby that they went to see in a sieve, and I love that so much. And then he goes off and tumbles through the river, and then listens to the one soldier singing the song, and then he gets back and he saves the day. I just think everything comes together so well at the end of this movie. The letter gets delivered. The scene right before that, actually, when he's running through the front line and running into people and bumping, and this is the final stretch of him delivering the letter, is stunning to look at. It's really well shot and captured. The music is on point. It's the kind of climax of the whole film, of there's just this last push to save everyone, and you can see all of the men in the background running onto the field, and every time a man steps onto the field, he's failed that man, he's failed that man, he's failed that man because he didn't get there in time. But there's still so many other men who haven't gone on yet that he still can save, and he's able to, and it's wonderful. And then, like I said, he meets Blake's brother and then leans by the tree, and the movie is over. I just loved this movie. The more I think about it and the more I talk about it, the more I want to watch it again and again and again and again, because I just think this movie is wonderful, and I don't think that it beats out Jojo Rabbit as my favorite movie of 2019, but it's probably a close second. And it's interesting that number one and number two are both movies about world wars. 1917 is about World War One, and obviously Jojo Rabbit is about World War Two. Now that brings up the question, though, of how does this movie compare to other war movies? And I think eventually one day I'll do an episode on my favorite war movies. I'll do a dedicated episode on that. But for now, I'll just do a quick rundown. So this movie, it is a war movie, but it's not super violent or graphic at all. It is a little gruesome at times, I would say, but there's not tons and tons of blood pouring out of people and things like that. But there is a little bit of things where you're just things that just make you a little bit uncomfortable. But the camera doesn't focus on that too much. It just pans over it and it comes and goes. So it's not something that you need to worry about a whole lot in that respect. One of my favorite war movies, obviously Saving Private Ryan is amazing. I really like Hacksaw Ridge. 1917 is really, really good. The Bridge on the River Kwai is a movie I haven't seen in a really long time. I actually just got it from the library to rewatch it, but I remember really liking that one as well. The Great Escape is pretty good. What other war movies are there? Dunkirk. I think Dunkirk is fantastic. So there are a lot of really great war movies out there, and I think that 1917 is definitely among that pantheon of fantastic war movies. I think that's going to be pretty much it for today's episode, though. I did get a little bit in depth into the characters and stuff in this episode, which I really, really like doing. But there isn't, because this movie is so razor focused on these two characters, there isn't a whole lot else to talk about. So today's episode is a little bit shorter because of that. But I would love to know what you thought of 1917, if you've had the opportunity to see it, and just in general, what is your favorite war movie? Please let me know by reaching out on social media. You can find me on Twitter @PoddleNathan and on Instagram @PoddleProductions. If you haven't done so, please feel free to subscribe to the show. You can do so on iTunes, Google Play, and Spotify. I release new episodes every Friday morning. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode, guys. I really appreciate it. And if you have nothing else to do, go watch more movies.